Welcome back, everyone. My name is Adam Soroka. I'm the Managing Director of Cavendish Group International. Delighted to be hosting the Future Downstream event. And thank you very, very much for joining us on a brilliant day so far. Really enjoyed the morning sessions on predictive maintenance and the work that was presented from Loomis. So a real good start to the day in terms of some insights into technology, crossing a little bit into decarbonisation as well. Now, coming up next, we have an area that is, I still think it's massively overlooked in the grand scheme of technology integration. And it's probably the most important part of any adoption of anything into a company, because it's cybersecurity is and should be number one on everyone's priority list. And we've got an absolutely superb panel of experts on this. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's moderated by Katherine Hutton, who's Senior Strategy Consultant for StealthPath Incorporated. The panel is actually called The Convergence of IT and OT, Ensuring Best Practices for Data Regulation to Protect Downstream Assets. So, Katherine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Adam, and welcome everyone to panel 7 of the Future Downstream Conference. Today's panel is going to cover some of the best practices for addressing increased regulatory and security demands, highlight some challenges to be aware of, and touch on some innovations that actually leverage the increased connectivity across IT and OT environments. And to kick it off, we're going to do some introductions of our panelists. I'm going to have each panelist say their name, company, provide a little bit of background on their line of business, and talk about their role. And I'm going to start off with Marcin.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Marcin Szczepanik, and I'm heading information security for the company called Essar Oil. So we are the oil refinery based in northwest of UK, responsible for about 16% of the supply to petrol stations in UK, as well as several key airports within North and Central UK. I manage all aspects of information security, compliance, including GDPR, and collaboration with UK regulators. At this moment in time, our key focus is on looking at the entire OT layer and improving the cybersecurity posture within the business. Thank you.
All right, next, Sharul.
Hi, good days, everybody. My name is Sharul Rashid. I am a Group Technical Authority, Instrumentation Control Patronus. Has been in Patronus 30 plus years, and I've been in charge with the instrumentation issues plan-wide in Patronus. In particular, to cybersecurity, we are having this project to deploy real-time OT and also OT asset monitoring system in the OT environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Srinivasan?
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Srinivasan Vanchinathan. I'm Director of Refining Digital Operations at Phillips 66 in the US. Prior to joining Phillips 66, I was Chief Information Officer for Philadelphia Energy Solutions in Philadelphia, responsible for IT, OT, cybersecurity, all of that. And now I'm responsible for digital transformation in the refining space, looking at emerging technologies in the area of wireless monitoring, wireless technology, mobile devices, to improve operational excellence, safety, and increase efficiency in the refining operations. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael.
My name is Michael Lewis. I am a cybersecurity and technology strategy planner at Chevron in our central cybersecurity organization. Responsibility, as the title might imply, with helping put together our cybersecurity strategy. Also have certification within quantitative risk assessment, and also spend a little bit of time doing policy and legislative application.
All right, thanks. So let's get the conversation going. So Adam mentioned that cybersecurity is something that needs to be taken into account when converging IT and OT. And according to Drago CEO Robert Lee, probably IT-OT convergence actually took place about 15 years ago. So despite the heavy marketing over the last few years, it's not really a new phenomenon. When the COVID pandemic forced a change in daily operations to support more remote connectivity, however, the hyper-connectivity that exists in operational environments became more apparent. So with a greater understanding and awareness of the connectivity that does exist, today's IT-OT convergence is more of a cultural one. So I'd like to talk with the panelists about how their companies are approaching this cultural shift and why it's important to embrace it. And I'll start out with Marcin. And if you can talk a little bit about how Essar is doing training employees and how sometimes that can be the best approach.
Sure, no problem. So what we have learned within our organization is that being an oil refinery utilizing many legacy type systems, you can't really improve all of them, upgrade all of them, or give remote access to all those systems for obvious reasons. But what we have learned is that the key focus for us was on training our employees. So we've developed several cybersecurity awareness programs, several forums where cybersecurity has been added to the monthly agenda, and I have to say that we, regardless of all the difficulties of pandemic that arrived globally about 2 years ago, we have managed to survive and even progress further with our strategy. And that was thanks to people realizing how important it is and also realizing what the risk is to the entire business, which originates from that cybersecurity. So it's become a norm for us. We do regular awareness training. We do things like phishing campaigns. We have regular catch-ups with the OT layer. So I'm the link between IT and OT specialist on that matter. And it has worked for us. And at this moment in time, we are looking at progressing further into technology that can be utilized for our OT layer to improve our response capabilities. But on many occasions, without awareness and training within the business, we wouldn't have been able to succeed with our cybersecurity strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that Chevron has come up with a liaison program between IT practitioners and OT practitioners to help raise awareness and educate both types of operators. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So coincidentally, it happened about 15 years ago or a little longer ago, where we had the split between IT and OT, where we had, IT didn't know much about OT, and OT tried to ignore IT as much as possible. And so what my boss did at the time was to bring an engineer out of the OT space and basically put them into our organization, the IT security organization. So that did two things. First, for the OT folks, it gave them a voice or someone within the IT organization with whom they trusted and they could talk with if there were issues that the IT folks were imposing or doing to them. From the IT standpoint, it exposed us to the OT world. I remember that guy giving me an opportunity to look at the ISO 99 standard when it first came out and explaining us the difference between the CIA on the cybersecurity IT side and the AIC focused on the availability first rather than confidentiality on the OT side. So that gave us the awareness on the IT side as to what some of the differences were between IT and OT. And it began fostering that communications back and forth. We also then modified our standards program to include a process control component so that when we passed an IT standard, the process control folks would look at it, modify it so that it wouldn't affect that environment. So it started creating fostering that type of communication coordination between the two organizations. Eventually, now our OT and IT cybersecurity folks are in the same organization. We actually know each other on a first name basis and talk to each other. So we've established that culture that you were talking about earlier when you did the introduction to this.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to move on to the next topic. Critical infrastructure, which of course includes oil and gas industry, is increasingly being disrupted by cybersecurity incidences. And this was demonstrated last year by the Colonial Pipeline incident in the US that resulted in disruption and price increases for automobile and other fuels. And the recent discovery of the malware toolkit PipeDream has also served as a recent wake-up call. And this malware was designed to target industrial control systems like power grids, factories, water utilities, and oil refineries. Wired Magazine even called it the Swiss Army knife for hacking industrial control systems and a rare species of digital badness. I'd like to hear from the panelists about how your companies assess preparedness to respond to malware like PipeDream and how they work to improve response capabilities to cybersecurity incidences that might impact your industrial control systems or enterprise IT systems. And I'll start with Sharul, if you can talk a little bit about what Paternus does.
Sure. Thanks, Katherine. We have started our journey to establish the cybersecurity starting 2018. Before that, the OT has been working independently from the IT. IT is working from their side, OT is working from their side. So we figured that it will not work for the robust defense. So we have this, when you mentioned the convergence, that we have to work together, and we have strategized the deployment of projects where we will install the real-time automatic patching to make sure that the virus and the patching are done continuously in automatic fashion, so that there is no gaps between the declaring of vulnerability and the patching of the vulnerability. So at the same time, we have come up with a system, cyber defense. So we have this intelligence, we have this risk assessment that we have conducted throughout our crown jewel assets to make sure that the potential vulnerabilities are being looked at and being closed out. And we are also making sure that we have these also OT asset monitoring to make sure that it will detect any potential threat that's coming from external. We can have an alert system. We have a security operations center that will monitor 24/7 of all endpoints that potentially detect any potential threats. And we also have this exercise to make sure that the communication between the lower level and the top level are being coordinated accordingly, so that the virus or the incident that potentially is going to happen, everybody understand that it is being done in a coordinated fashion. Thank you.
And Srinivasan, how is Phillips 66 approaching incident response?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, if you go back 10, 15 years, only the OT layer was operating in real time, right? The IT layer was in near real time, I would call it. But with the speed and technology improvements these days, both IT is also caught up in speed. So what that means is the outermost layer, which is the IT layer, needs to respond in real time and prepare for any intrusions from outside in real time. And they have to have systems and processes and people in place to detect and respond and recover from those. So with a lot of geopolitical considerations, we have to have teams that can act on specific protocols in real time, monitor the system, monitor the touch points, where the data is exchanged between the IT and OT layer and monitor those very closely so that we can quickly respond as well as segregate the network. So we have Operations Center monitoring that 24/7 from a data transfer layer, from the IT side, and also within OT side, we monitor our systems to make sure that there is no anomalous data movement is happening between devices and between the layers.
Great. So continuous monitoring and exercises and practicing. And Marcin, I think you'd mentioned also in our conversation that your company had recently gone through an exercise here. Would you talk a little bit about who all was involved with that and what are some of the key takeaways you learned?
Sure, absolutely. I think my first statement for this subject is just do it. So the incident response plan doesn't have to be perfect. There is no ideal or perfect recipe how to design your incident response procedure for your organization. Each organization is different, and each organization may require different response aligned to their processes. So what we did, we reviewed ours, we reviewed this several times, we formulated that plan, and we gone ahead and did an business-wide exercise of an intruder trying to get into our network. And there were various scenarios in this. I think the last one we did, we carried on for 5 days. So we had injects happening every day for a period of a week, and it was an eye-opener. First of all, we identified several gaps in our incident response plan that you can't sometimes identify when you draft those. But secondly, it was a big eye-opener across the business of what it would look like if it was real. And I'm cautious I don't reveal too much, but to an extent that it supported my strategy from the board members to invest into several improvements. And when I'm saying improvements, that doesn't mean just technology. It means processes, people, and the way you deal with those scenarios when things go terribly wrong. Because when things go wrong, it's the time which is important, and it's the focus from all the key members of your organization to deal with that problem rather than ignoring it. So my advice is do it, and do it as many times as you can, and involve other stakeholders in your organization. And I mean not just technology departments, your legal, your PR people, your finance teams, and to an extent try to involve the CEO. Why wouldn't you? He needs to know what will happen if this is real and what will be expected from him, what decisions to make. So we did that, and I'm just going to add to this, we also did that not just for our organization, but we did that across other critical national infrastructure organizations in UK. So we collaborated between other organizations and the UK regulator on that matter. And it was a really, really eye-opener exercise, and it helped me a lot in building the cybersecurity strategy for this organization. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So understanding the transition of IT, OT convergence and the importance of education, training your employees, and then we just talked about practicing, being prepared, understanding what a cyber incident might look like and knowing how to handle that. So what are some of the other pitfalls that companies might face in this IT, OT convergence? I want to take it to Michael to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one pitfall is trying to impose the IT structure onto the process control structure. I kind of mentioned earlier about the differences between security on process control and on IT. So on the IT side, if something fails, you want to protect everything that's on the network. You want to fail closed, basically. So protect confidentiality. That's likely the last thing you want to do on the process control side, because if you've got a process that's running awry, the last thing you want to have happen to you is the inability to get to a console to try to do something about it. So you want to fail open. And so you have to make sure that the controls that you're putting in place in the OT system allow you that flexibility. That you can still get to the system. You're a little less concerned about the data perhaps on those systems than you are on the IT side. Some of the things that we do on the IT side that we take for granted, like automatic scans, are things you also don't want to necessarily do on the process control side, simply because, again, you're focused on availability. And so doing these types of scans, delaying someone on the IT side a couple of seconds to do a virus scan probably isn't that big a deal, because it's just going to keep them from going to whatever website or email they're trying to get to. On the process control side, that could be the difference between something going wrong or right. Architecture also comes into play. Most of us are likely using a large number of industrial Internet of Things devices, some of which may not have very robust security, but they collect decent or good data that we use for process efficiencies and other things. We tried not to put those onto the process control network itself. So if they are compromised, now the attacker may be able to get to the data, so they get a lot of temperature readings and what valves are open or not, things that aren't quite that interesting, but they can't take control over the network itself. So the process is still robust. That's probably good, and I'll turn it over back to you to see if others want to add on to that.
Sharul, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are some things that companies should be aware of as they realize there's more hyper-connectivity between OT and IT environments.
Sure, Katherine. In the drafting the strategy for making cyber robust or cyber resilient, the IT, because the project manager comes from IT background, so they would like to push their IT knowledge in this making the cyber resilient into the OT environment without realizing the impact of when somebody hacked. It can be a catastrophic HSE, environment spillage and explosion, etc. So they are trying, for example, to push the Active Directory, enterprise Active Directory, all the way to the OT environment, which means if you want to access DCS, the PLC, the OT assets, your password is actually using your enterprise password. But what happens if the hacker get that Active Directory, they penetrate into the IT Active Directory, the enterprise Active Directory? That will mean they get also access to the OT assets. It is very direct, So we have cases where hackers can get into that enterprise Active Directory through whatever means, and once they get the Active Directory, they can immediately access to the OT directory because of the same directory. So that is a pitfall that I would make sure that there is an isolation between. It has to be separate. The Active Directory has to be separate. The way we build the resilience is around the when you get into the OT asset, you have this physical wall, physical defense by your card. That is actually another defense. So you compensate that by having that defense around having your pass card, your smart building card, for example, to access to that building. So that is the thing that we must be watching out when it comes to this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. So Srinivasan, I saw you nodding your head when Sharul was talking about data segregation and the pitfall that can create when you don't have that segregation. Do you want to add anything else to that comment?
So, what I wanted to say there was, with all the IoT devices coming into play, collecting data, useful information that can truly make somebody's life easy. in terms of making decisions. The tendency is to push all the data that is collected outside of the OT into the OT layer. I mean, that's a tendency of it's a human nature, because you want to provide as much information to the console operator so that they can act on that information. So we need to resist that tendency to say, is this absolutely necessary that we need to push this information down to the OT layer, right? So every time when we look at a data, a specific type of data, what is it used for? What is the audience? What is the end use? We need to be very clear about it and then make conscious decision whether that should reside in IT layer for doing applications versus pushing that down to OT layer to make real-time decisions. I think we need to stop, think, and act on that particular aspect of it, because our natural tendency is to put everything in front of people who can make decisions, but that is not always the right solution.
Great, that's a great point. And Marcin, yes, words from the wise. What else can you warn or inform our audience about pitfalls in undergoing this convergence?
I would say, having worked in the positions when I was managing both IT, NOT, and cybersecurity, I think the biggest pitfall is that they don't always collaborate, and I would always embrace that collaboration between the two layers. The understanding of risk is different for both layers, and they need to share their understanding between themselves. When you do risk assessment of your OT layer, or when you do risk assessment of the IT layer, involve the other layer into that. So when you're doing assessment of OT layer, get your IT guys to join those calls, to join those meetings, because they can influence the OT input into the assessment, because they have different understanding. And a classic example is, for IT security layer, anything below Windows 2019 is a risk, right? For IoT layer, anything below Windows XP is a risk, but Windows XP is still acceptable, right? So those are two different layers of understanding of risk, and you can achieve the improvement in that space by collaboration. Those two layers have to talk to each other all the time. And one way to do that collaboration, which what I found quite successful, is share the skills between the layers. So have some of your OT guys involved in some of your IT processes, so they know what IT is going through, and the other way around. Have your IT security guys involved in the OT processes, so they can also understand, and that was what Michael said earlier on, that you want to be open by default on your OT layer. You don't want to shut everything down when there is a problem. You want to keep it open as long as you want. And if you share those skills between them, if you make them shadow each other, they will collaborate between themselves much more than ever before. And I think that has been the biggest success in my career, to have that collaboration between the two layers. Thank you.
Katherine, I want to add one more thing, that is, I think we collectively, our employees are our first line of defense, right? So cybersecurity to be thought of in that fashion. What I mean by that is, typically when an employee walks into a refinery today, they are reminded of the safety protocols. So we need to remind our employees of the cybersecurity protocols as well. Right, because people, when they walk into the refinery, into the field, they scan the environment, make sure there are no hazards, the slip, trip, and falls. There is nothing lying on the floor that I might be tripped on and fall and break my bone. Right, so we are very conscious of that. To the similar attention to detail needs to happen at all levels when it comes to cybersecurity. And only then we would reach a point of reducing any of these events from happening in the first place.
I love that point. It's embracing the reality that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility at the company.
Yes.
And really being aware of that, just as people are aware of paying attention to safety hazards and knowing how to respond to that. So
yes.
Great point. All right, so we just talked about the pitfalls. You all provided some great insight and also some ideas on how to address those pitfalls. And convergence of IT and OT can also lead to greater innovation. That's why companies are moving towards that, greater efficiency, competitive advantage. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the innovations that are happening at the convergence. Where do you see IoT, machine learning, and data analytics fitting into this picture? And I'll start with you, Srinivasan, to talk a little bit about the work that Phillips 66 is doing on its data platform.
Yeah, so the data is, we have been used to collecting data at the OT layer for a long period of time, right? We have historians collecting data in a minute or maybe, even faster frequency. But these days, with the IoT capability, we are also collecting data on the IT layer, which is process information that was not possible in the past because we did not have those sensors being available, or the technology, maybe, so for example, a wireless technology being available to transfer that data. Now we have that capability. So I go back to the same discussion we had before, which is when you collect that data, yes, the data provides information, but that we need to segregate. Where is the segregation needs to happen? Does this information need to pass the IT OT layer? If it doesn't need to, if it is only a decision support system that you are planning to implement, then you need to create a data platform outside of the OT layer where you can unify data from different sources. It could be OT layer data, it could be IT layer data, and also IoT layer data. So bring them all together in the IT layer and develop advanced applications to do predictive maintenance, optimizing your turnaround schedule. All of that can be done right in the IT layer. None of those information needs to be going back into the OT layer, because this is not real-time information and no real-time decisions are getting made based on that. But there are situations where you are providing real-time decision support to the operations. Even that, you could do the implementation on the IT layer and provide only the information or the recommendation to the console operator by multiple means, because the technology is available today. Now we have mobile devices that is available that they can access in front of the console. Not everything needs to be on the console. So we created a data platform strategy. We are bringing in data from different sources. For example, the SAPs, PCMS, different systems supporting different aspects of refining business. And we look at it holistically and glean insights which would not have been possible without all of these new artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms that are being made available, both in the open source as well as in the proprietary information from different companies.
Marcin, where you mentioned that sometimes there's a mixed understanding when you say IoT in the world of IT OT convergence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one that I came across in my career. That on few occasions I realized that there is a misunderstanding of what OT is, what IT is, and what IoT is. And the most controversial misunderstanding that I've ever had was around IoT is exactly a mixture of IT and OT. And that's never the case. That's a completely different technology. So from that point of view, when you are that CISO in your organization, you shouldn't just focus on the latest technology. You shouldn't just focus on IT environment, because they are driving the progression of the latest gizmos, latest security systems for you. You should focus on OT. You should focus on your commercial organization. You should focus on your maintenance teams, because they will need to understand that bringing IoT devices may affect their OT security layer, and they are not the same things. And then they may need to check with your IT security team whether there are enough measures and controls in place on the corporate one for any potential attack vectors for that IoT devices. Because the assumption from the OT layer may be that those devices are safe because they are on OT layer, but they're not, because they might have a dedicated connection to the internet which touches on your corporate network. But OT engineering teams may not necessarily realize that concept. So again, collaboration between the teams, and ideally having somebody who's got experience in both areas, IT and OT, to be that bridge of knowledge between the two, is one aspect that I found very successful in my career. Uh, and talking about the technology and using data analytics, IoT, machine learning, one thing that I have learned as well is that when you scope for those systems, for those modules in your organization, try to focus on the modular infrastructure. So make it scalable, make it flexible, allow for your system, your data lake, which has been scoped to capture data sources from 100 other systems at a time, allow this to grow to 300 systems in the future without needing to replace your infrastructure, without needing to power down your infrastructure to upgrade it. Use that technology that is available to you. And another one that I can share with the audience is the connectivity. So, being the refinery, it's not very easy and wise idea to start digging the road on your refinery to put more cables or upgrade your fiber optic connectivity, because that hardly ever happens. That's the reality of the business. But there are technologies like MPN, mobile private network. So we are currently exploring on that technology. So we can utilize your GSM 4G, 5G type connectivity and embed this as part of your corporate LAN. And that doesn't mean that means you don't have to dig the road, you don't have to go to the long-term shutdown, but you can still achieve your objective of connectivity on your OT layer across the business. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Michael, Sharul, would you like to add anything to that in terms of what actually makes sense right now in terms of integrating IoT, machine learning, data analytics, and the modular approach, and then also how do you then take into account the security aspect of doing that?
All right, thanks, Katherine. The new way of working post-COVID, we are now moving to remote control. So remote control means you are now exposing your crown jewel to the potential hacker outside there. So the priorities for the company should be looking for a very safe, secure data transfer, data monitoring, data command from, for example, from the remote in a very secure manner. That should be the priorities. At the same time, looking for an effective OT asset monitoring that can do the surveillance of potential threat from outside, where you locate your OT sensors at the OT layer and will be safeguarding that layer against potential attack by flagging to sending the alerts to a 24/7 security operation center. So that security operation center must be equipped with high-tech ability to filter out thousands of alerts that is coming from the endpoint, that building the analytics, the machine learning, artificial intelligence based on forensic intelligence, so that they can process that thousands of data, tens and thousands of data in 30 seconds or less, give the right analytics and the right alerts to the operator, and then we can actually take action quickly. That should be the way to go. Thank you.
So I'll go back to your original question about innovation as opposed to AI and machine learning and all that stuff. And one of the things that the pandemic did to us was obviously restrict travel. And so in the past, if there was an issue at an OT site, we would probably have sent an engineer from Houston or from wherever over to that site to go work on site to do that. Without the ability to do that with the pandemic, we started using augmented reality devices to allow the engineer to virtually go to those sites. You still had to have someone on site to turn valves or to turn switches. That gave it a way of putting not the artificial intelligence, but the human intelligence and kind of moving around the corporation a lot easier without having to travel or when we couldn't do that. So that's one of the innovations that we began to use in this particular space during the pandemic.
Great, thank you. That makes me, comes into our last question or topic before we turn it over to the audience questions in terms of consolidated data capture and creating those open platforms, like Sharul was saying, it's pulling all this information, all this data from everywhere, and you're trying to make sense of it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts if we can expand upon that idea, the pros and cons of creating an open data platform, both within a company and then also, any type of movement that there's going on to create open shared platforms of data outside of companies with collaborations between industry members.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So not in the downstream space, but in the upstream space, we participate in an open collaboration with something called the Open Group, where it's a common data platform for, I think it's subsurface. And again, in our industry, as all of us know, a lot of partnerships. Whenever we go into one of these large, especially upstream sites, we have to have multiple partners on site. We're sharing the same data, sharing the same system. So utilizing an open platform that provides some structure around what the data is supposed to look like facilitates those types of arrangements.
Great. Any other comments from the panelists?
Yeah, in Phillips 66, we are focused. We are primarily a downstream and midstream company, so we are focused on internal data platform that brings in data, unifies them, contextualizes them, categorizes them, so that we can develop advanced applications for both corporate use and standardization of some of these KPIs across different sites, so we can share knowledge and best practices across to improve operational excellence and safety. So we embarked on internal data platform strategy instead of relying on an open platform to provide us that support. And of course, the internal platform is also proprietary, where we develop advanced applications, deep learning optimization for process control, applications which use large amounts of data with the power of compute that is available in the cloud these days. We are able to leverage that and get additional insights which would not have been possible before. So we have been successful in doing that. Data platform, it becomes a kind of a necessity for every company, because data analytics, it has gone far beyond in the past 10 years. So we want to take advantage of that and then eke out the last barrel from what we have. That is the data. So if you already don't have a data platform strategy, there are tons of material available. You can Google them, get started somewhere, get started in data analytics to show defined business outcomes, connect the analytics to use cases.
Great, thank you. And I think we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the audience. Feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and we'll try to cover as many as we can. The first question we've already gotten is for Marcin. This goes back to when you were talking about the tabletop exercise, incident response exercise that you did. And it's a multi-part question. So was that set of exercises on test systems or production systems or both?
No, so actually this wasn't what you would call a proper red-blue teaming when you've got your advanced technology teams involved in the process and trying to take your infrastructure down. This was more around designed scenarios that we would present a scenario which didn't actually happen effectively, but we would present that scenario every couple of hours. It would progress. So it would be stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And at each stage of that scenario, we would have relevant departments involved in the discussion. And the discussion was not about get your techies to sort the problem out. It would be what would you do if that was the case in real life? What would you do? Would you have an PR response plan to the media? Would you have a response message to any press that was contacting you? What would you do with UK regulators? Would you contact them at this stage? Do you know how to contact them? Do you know what you have to do to contact them? So this was more about testing the entire processes within the business as opposed to the advancement of your IT or an OT teams. And that worked well because from my experience, when things go wrong, you need that support from the business. It's not just your IT response team or OT response team that needs to be there all the time. It's the rest of the business. And there might be a decisions that you need to make that you're going to shut down part of your operations on your refinery, but you're going to carry on with the rest of it. And that's when you may need support and input from your advanced technical teams to tell you what is safe to do. But the decision may need to be done on the level of COO. So operation officer may need to make that decision. When you're paying ransomware, not paying ransomware, then you may need to have an input from your CFO. He may know what are the terms of the business insurance for your organization, and are we okay to accept that ransomware or are we not okay? But then you may need to check with your commercial officer whether that's acceptable from the reputation point of view. And what we found is, but by doing this exercise and getting those individuals involved, it opens their eye what it would look like if it was real. So when I was referring to this UK CNI-wide exercise, it was tabletop exercise based on thoroughly thought scenarios and progression of those scenarios.
Great, thank you. And I just to add that, that chain of communication and being clear about who's in charge of what during that incident and the efficiency with which, that's communicated, I think is going to be even more key going forward as there are more regulations around the world and countries about the time you have to report, a significant cyber incident. So being able to do that in a timely manner, and then also to know how you're going to actually physically respond, contain to whatever the incident is that's happening is really key important. So just highlighting the importance of doing tabletops.
And that is a very valid comment, because most organizations, what they do include in their response plan is that you've got 72 hours to report this to that regulator. But actually, how do you report it? Do you phone them? Do you send an email? And what if your email is compromised? How do you report that then? So it's good to do those exercises to review those processes. So in certain cases in UK, you actually could register your personal email address for emergency purposes with your regulator, because if your company is compromised, they need to have other means to communicate to you. So things like that, it's worth reviewing. And that is the perfect opportunity to review it is by doing your tests.
Great. Yeah. And now that we're talking, we started off talking about education, awareness, making sure that there is integrated space between OT and IT teams, and really in that whole incident response effort, including everybody. So thank you for expanding on that. We don't have any more questions at this point from the audience, so I'd like to turn it over to the panelists to give a final key takeaway that you'd like to share when people are thinking about how do I approach the cybersecurity challenges and obstacles when I'm looking at this convergence across IT and OT. And I'll start with Sharul. kick it off for us? Oh, we don't have any sound.
Sorry. Okay. Because of the so important bonding between the IT and OT, the relationship, people are now talking about no more convergence, they're talking about fusion. So to symbolize the very important relationship between IT, OT, the connectivity, the understanding, the collaboration, that is actually very important for the cyber resilient company. Thank you.
Srinivasan?
So I have a few points. One is I think I echo everybody's sentiment here, which is you have to train and retrain your workforce in terms of understanding the cybersecurity implications to your business, to your operations, because ultimately they are the first line of defense, right? We do, you train your IT folks, you train your OT folks in terms of different processes. How do you maintain your systems? How do you do the patching and all that? Because those are well defined, and we have probably taken some of the good best practices from IT and OT, and we are not. I'm not very concerned about that aspect of it, because as Michael pointed out, we started embedding IT people into the OT and OT people into the IT. This is we all need to recognize that this is not a technology issue. This is a people issue. And we need to train our people, both the technologists who would monitor and respond and recover from any incidents, but we need to prevent it from the first place from happening. And the best way to do that is to train your employees to be aware of cybersecurity requirements for the company and what it can do to your operation, your business, and the consequences of that. And then train your people, or the CEOs and CIOs of the company, to be aware of, if an incident were to happen, who do they need to reach out? Different countries have different regulations. Going back to Marcin's point, you need to be aware that how do you reach them, right? If it is an environmental incident, there is a protocol that is written in the refinery emergency operations system. Where do they need to reach out? If you're operating in a specific state, the state regulatory bodies will have some reporting requirements compared to, say, the EPA in the US. So the team needs to be aware of all of that. I think that is primarily the main reason why train and retrain is the key.
Michael?
I think I'm in violent agreement with all the other panelists. You've got to keep the folks together. I'll give you a little anecdote from about 20 years ago. I was at a workshop where we basically had a bunch of OT folks and a bunch of IT folks, and the first 15, 30 minutes of that were, you don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what you're doing, with a lot of finger pointing. They put us on an exercise where we were asked to identify risks, and they paired an IT guy and an OT guy. And when we did the risks independently and compared them, and I think on the one I was paired with, we ended up the first 5 risks were exactly the same. So all of us had the same view of the world. We were just coming from it from a different standpoint. So getting people in the right room, getting them interchanges the folks have talked about, creating liaison positions, minimal knowledge, understanding a little bit of what goes on in that environment. That's how you make this stuff work, and then people begin to naturally work with each other, and you get that collaboration culture that you're looking for.
And Marcin, you want to close us out?
Sure. So looking at the subject of this whole panel, I would say, when you're looking at all the data regulation, protecting your assets, your cybersecurity posture for your assets, those assets, you need to know what they are, what they do, how advanced they are, and that knowledge in many cases is within your business, within the different departments around your business. So when you are in a similar position like myself, when you are that cybersecurity expert for your organization, you need to be known. You need to be involved in all those departments, in all those teams, whether you are popular or not popular sometimes, because that's what it takes as part of your job. You need to be there, and you need to make everybody aware that there is a reason why we all doing it, and give them a good example yourself. So by your behavior, by the way you speak, by the way you present the processes and knowledge to the rest of the business, give them a good example so you get engagement from everybody. And that particularly applies to OT, because as we all know, OT does not change as fast as the rest of your business. What was valid for them 20 years ago, in some cases, is still valid today. But that wouldn't apply to the rest of your organization because they've moved on. So be that expert, be that face that everybody is aware of, and try to engage with the rest of your business and make them collaborate. Do those tests, do those exercises, publish information on your intranet, whatever the means you've got in your organization. Make sure that people are aware what cybersecurity is doing in your organization and why is it important. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, panelists, for your time, and thank you, conference participants, to listening and joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Adam.
Yeah, that was a really good point that Marcin finished on, actually, about getting everyone to buy in. You might not be the most popular person when you start talking about, cyber, but I think it's a collective responsibility from the company. I think it doesn't just fall under one person. And the message that I got from the panel is that it is everyone's responsibility to protect the business. It's not just the person in charge of cyber, IT, OT. Everyone is sort of connected to the system. And I think that was really well discussed by everyone. It was good to have different views. You had sort of the operators, but you had also the refineries. So you had Essar and you had Phillips 66, which gave a real interesting viewpoint on it. They're dealing a lot with aging, older assets as well. So I like what Michael Lewis said about the legacy. I think it's the liaison program he had. That was very clever, because at least you got the OT and IT guys together, and you converge in a forceful way to say, right, what are you going to do? How are you going to work together? And I think that's a really good thing. There's clearly a divide between the two departments, and what you can do to facilitate that is always going to help. So that was a really good thing from Michael. And obviously what Srinivasan was saying about responding in real time. And I liked Marcin's view on, incident response plans and procedures. Just do it, get on with it. The more you delay it, the more risk you have. And I think nothing's going to be perfect. You're not going to get a perfect system rolling out straight away. That's the reality of it. But something is better than nothing. And I think you'll learn from your mistakes, and you'll pick up things as you do this more regularly. So really, really insightful. Again, attention to detail from all levels, a big chain of communication with cyber as well. And I don't know if it's Srinivasan said this towards the end, but I really like this, where he said it's not a technology issue, it's a people issue. And I think that maybe needs to be communicated within organizations, that people think cyber, it's down to the technology guys, it's a tech thing, but actually it is a people's issue. And judging by that panel, it seems to be a people's issue. So brilliantly moderated by Katherine, and that was a fantastic discussion, really, really insightful. So thank you very much for every panelist who participated on that as well.